This episode of The Overlook is presented by Sunlight Tax. Hannah Cole delivers engaging and empowering tax education for visionary creatives. Learn more at sunlighttax.com.
I am a maker, a builder, a baker, although sometimes my messes are all that you'll find.
It's a challenging time to be a Democrat elected to statewide office in North Carolina when Republicans hold supermajorities in the State House and Senate.
There's always going to be that little 5% in the back of my brain that, like, I'd make a pretty good hermit on a lake in Maine and just go away and never talk to anyone ever again. But the other 95% of me has to stay and fight. I don't feel like I have a choice because there are people that live in this state that can't fight and that don't have a voice.
I'm Matt Peiken. Today is the second half of my conversation with North Carolina Senator Julie Mayfield and Representative Lindsey Prather. If you missed part one, just scroll back a day in your podcast feed to yesterday's episode. We talked today about their fight for women's rights and voting rights, and also for progressive values at a time when democracy itself is under threat. We also talk about the push to give cities like Asheville more local control in a state where the legislature determines so much of what can and can't happen at a local level. Hannah Cole wants to keep you from making a mistake when you file your business taxes. Hannah is an Asheville artist and the accountant who founded Sunlight Tax to help solo entrepreneurs like her.
I get a lot of questions about how to navigate the IRS payment website.
So, Hannah made a video that shows when you pay your business taxes versus your first estimated quarterly tax payment.
Combining them can get you into trouble. Clicking the wrong drop-down can get you in trouble because you cannot be properly credited for the tax you're actually paying, and it can just cause you a little nightmare rabbit hole of sorting out with the IRS.
In her video, Hannah shows you how she made her own payments. She says you can place her video right alongside the IRS website and follow along with her step by step.
Getting the navigation correct is really helpful. It just saves you a lot of headache.
Like so many other free resources she produces, Hannah just gives you the video. Make your tax time a little sunnier by watching her video at sunlighttax.com/overlook. That's sunlighttax.com/overlook. I began this half of our conversation by asking Julie Mayfield and Lindsey Prather whether they're spending the bulk of their time trying to tamp down dumpster fires of legislation rather than making any progress, as they define it, on key issues. Julie Mayfield speaks first.
So we know these bills are coming, and we will have our messaging, and we will respond to them. But what's more important is our proactive bills and efforts around different issues, the ones I mentioned before. A set of bills on guns, a set of bills on women's rights, a set of bills on LGBTQ. And we're not waiting to respond to their stuff. We are affirmatively putting out what our positions are. We know their stuff's going to come. They introduced a raft of anti-LGBTQ, anti-trans legislation this week. And we did our stuff. We did our pro-LGBTQ, let's take care of everybody and respect everybody in our community last week, 2 weeks ago. So if we felt like we needed to do the whack-a-mole thing, yeah, it would be hard for us to get anything done. But we don't play that game.
Another example is the RBG Act. So while, yes, on the one side, we know that we are going to have really terrible abortion bills coming our way, but we also, a couple weeks ago, were able to introduce a bill that would strip all of these medically unnecessary barriers that we have in North Carolina, some of the highest number in the country, things like the 72-hour waiting period that require quote-unquote counseling over the phone, having to take a pill in front of a medical doctor, a physician, instead of at home. So all of these completely medically unnecessary barriers. So there are the proactive legislation that we are introducing at the same time. We introduced the Parents and Students Bill of Rights, signaling that, yes, absolutely, we believe that parents should have rights. But if we're all saying that we're centering and focusing on the students, then we need to make sure those students are covered as well.
And the other big issue, in addition to the ones that I've talked about, is voting rights. I can't believe I've forgotten about voting rights. Voting rights and gerrymandering and We, again, I can't remember, 2 or 3 weeks ago, introduced a whole set of bills around voting rights, comprehensive legislation that would create an independent redistricting committee that would protect poll workers and election workers from harassment. I think there's another one that I co-sponsored about prohibiting guns at polling locations. Again, we're introducing the legislation that we know North Carolinians want.
If North Carolinians want this kind of legislation, is there anything that can happen from your vantages to persuade a public to lean on their conservative or Republican legislator to make a difference? Or is it all about turnout at the ballot box at this point?
It's both. I will say, because of the policies that we've seen over the last decade in North Carolina, voters have so many other things that they have to worry about in their daily lives that we have made harder and harder for them. Their economic situations, lack of childcare, cost of living, all of these things that are impacting their daily life, concerns about the public schools. And so I would certainly not say that it's apathy. I would say that it is struggling to deal with other things that voters feel like impact them more directly. Now, of course, we know obviously that who you elect and who you vote for and who you volunteer for impacts your life directly as well. But it can be difficult to message that when people are just trying to survive.
It's also true that most of our districts are either solid R or solid D districts. In the Senate, for instance, there were really only 5 races that were a toss-up. And both parties invested millions of dollars in those races. And we won 3 of them, and they won 2 of them, and that's the way that ball bounces.
Yeah.
So for a lot of people in the state, for a lot of Democrats who live in Republican districts, a lot of them think, why should I vote? It doesn't matter. What they forget is that there are so many other races on those ballots, right? They forget that there are the statewide races. They forget that there are local races, and that they can have a tremendous influence. And we've lived in a gerrymandered state now for over a decade, and I think that has had a wearing down effect on a lot of Democrats. I spoke with an African-American woman before this last election, begging her to vote, and even pointing to the fact that Sherry Beasley was at the top of our ticket, a black woman running for U.S. Senate in North Carolina. It doesn't get any better than that. And she needs your support, I'm saying to this woman. And the woman's answer was, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what my vote is. And even when I said to her, 2 years ago, Sherry Beasley ran to keep her seat on the North Carolina Supreme Court, and she lost by just over 400 votes. And I don't know if some of your listeners may know this, but there are a number of counties in the state that could have shifted that outcome. In Buncombe County alone, we had more than 400 Democrats who voted at the top of the ticket who didn't vote in that race. That's going to be true in Mecklenburg, in Wake, in New Hanover, in any number of counties. But people don't vote all the way down, or they don't vote at all, because they've been conditioned now, and they do believe that their vote doesn't matter. And it's a bit of that self-fulfilling prophecy. The more we're gerrymandered, the more people are disenfranchised, the more they step away from the process.
And the gerrymandering is become more cemented with the North Carolina Supreme Court. Before, the Supreme Court had struck down maps continually, these GOP-created maps, saying these are unconstitutional. The GOP turns in a new map. It's just as unconstitutional as the last. And now with a Supreme Court majority, 5-2 for Republicans, that there's no pressure to create maps that are democratic or fair. With gerrymandering seemingly locked in unless and until the Supreme Court flips. And even when the Supreme Court flips, the legislature said, basically, we don't care. We're going to keep creating these maps and run out the clock. They run out the clock until deadline happens. And then they said, well, we just have to use the most recent map. That's what just happened this last election. What's the answer?
So I will just add that in addition to the entrenchment that comes with gerrymandering that can cause people to disengage, the constant changing of the maps is causing people to disengage. When you can't keep track of who your representative is, of what your district number is, of where the line is, when you can't keep track of those things, it makes it harder and harder to do your research, to find the information that you need to be an informed voter. So in that way, I don't blame people. Now, certainly it is our responsibility to send that message of why it's important. It is the responsibility of the local parties to send the message to the voters of why it's important. But when you look at the long term and the pattern and the consistent defunding of civics and American history in high school, the bills coming out of trying to change what we can even teach in social studies, right? So it's a result of decisions that we've made in the last couple of years in the school system as well.
I don't want to be hyperbolic about this, but I get the sense, and you alluded to this a bit when you had that conversation with your colleague about this is an anti-democratic bill, and he shrugged his shoulders. Are we seeing at least one party not care about democracy anymore? That doesn't matter. It's more about control than it is about democracy.
Once again, you ring the bell on accuracy. Yes. They are, now that they have a supermajority, they are going about systematically securing their power across everything that they can. That bill that I talked about earlier about giving the legislature more appointments, that's exactly what that's about. We also just passed a bill this week that had an amendment added to it. It was a bill about charter schools. And they added an amendment that gives the legislature the power to approve the president of our community college system. Yep. Okay? So we have a process for choosing a president of our community college system, and it's the board of the community colleges that gets to make that decision. They're in the process of hiring a president right now, and what has happened is that the legislature doesn't like how that process is going. And there is a suspicion that somebody that they wanted to be in the final grouping is not in the final grouping. So the legislature is now inserting themselves into this process to get the outcome that they want. And they have done this time and time again. And I think it is insidious. I think it is, again, undemocratic, and it is absolutely all about control.
This is something I think in a larger sense of the body politic, the public, about an expectation of what democracy even is. And I'm seeing this sort of erode, that people who might say they are Republicans or might say they are Democrats, they don't really care much about democracy so much as things being their way.
And you'll hear some of them even say, we're not a democracy, we're a democratic republic. We're starting to hear that more and more, and that is extremely concerning to me. I think a lot of us saw this for the first time with former President Trump. We started to realize, the things that we have been taking for granted, the principles of the U.S. Constitution that we just assume everyone believes in, separation of powers, checks and balances, rule of law, that no one is above the law, right? These things that are just built into the foundation are things that we are not seeing everyone support, apparently.
Maybe this is naive of me, but I used to think that, hey, it's like debate class or debate club. You make your case, and if you didn't win, if other people believe and want the other thing, okay, we made our best case. You can't even do that anymore. It's not a matter of best case winning over the public and the public say happening. That doesn't happen anymore. So I have to go back to your roles as representatives and how do you even maintain your outlooks that you are making positive differences? And I hear in both of you, but how do you maintain your spirits about you in doing this work when it's such a fight just to even stave off the worst of the worst?
I have a brand new niece who's about 5 months old now. And obviously, I had already made the decision to run for office before she was born. And so there is still that I am doing this for my friends and my family that are still in the classroom, my friends and family who have children in the public education system and rely on that. But I'm also here for the next generation. I think that's one of the powers of having younger people in office is, and I gestured to Julie because I'm including her in that.
Oh, thank you so much.
It is that long-term view. I am seeing so much more of the Democratic Party and our Democratic representatives and legislators speaking about the long-term view. What is North Carolina going to look like 10, 15, 50 years from now? I don't hear that on the Republican side. What I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is, what is North Carolina going to look like while I'm still here in office in the next term? And so that's one of the things I think that keeps me going is I love this state. There's always going to be that little 5% in the back of my brain that, like, I'd make a pretty good hermit on a lake in Maine and just go away and never talk to anyone ever again. But the other 95% of me has to stay and fight. I don't feel like I have a choice because there are people that live in this state that can't fight and that don't have a voice. And so that is my responsibility.
Julie, you've been in public office quite a bit longer. You were in the Asheville City Council and now in the Senate. And has your outlook for this kind of work, this public service, has that evolved and changed in your time as an elected official?
Oh, sure. Being on city council and in the Senate are very different experiences. My experience on city council was if I got hold of an issue and did the work to develop it, get the policy, get my colleagues on board, I could get it done, whether that was a budget allocation, whether that was a policy change. And I did a lot of that. I think I can cite a lot of success in my city council. And there basically wasn't that there was opposition, there's just that there's work to do. And being in the Senate's very different. And that was a hard, even though I knew it intellectually going into this office, it was still just a hard realization because being there and realizing how little you could get done as a freshman, for sure. I had a period where I went through the 7 stages of grief, literally, and came out on the other side and said, but this is my life, and so I have to do what I can do where I am. And again, this session has been very different, and I will say, in answer to your question about how we keep going, is if I can get these bills through this year that I have co-sponsored with Republicans, that I have ratcheted back from what I would like in order to accommodate what they need in order to be supportive. If these half a dozen or 10 bills or so go through, then that will buoy me to keep going. If those bills don't go through, and if all the work that I've done to build those relationships and try to get support for these small, non-controversial things, if they don't get through, yeah, then it's going to be a lot harder because I'm not sure where to go from there.
Yeah.
So I remain hopeful about, and some people, actually somebody just described it to me as nibbling around the edges. That's all you're doing is nibbling around the edges. And my answer is, that's all we can do. And I will say there are a few issues. I was lucky enough 2 years ago to be part of the small team of Democrats who worked very hard on House Bill 951, which was our climate change bill. The climate plan has not turned out to be what everybody wanted it to be, and people wanted the bill to be different. We're still the only Republican-led legislature in the entire country that has passed a climate bill. So I'm going to take that as a victory. And so there are still opportunities to do big things like that. And I guess I would say that's the other thing that gives me hope.
Hannah Cole is an Asheville artist and accountant and the founder of Sunlight Tax. She has all kinds of free resources on her website, including a podcast called Sunlight. Hannah serves up practical advice in short episodes about taxes and shaping how people in creative fields think about business.
It is about tax and money issues for, I like to say, visionary creators. So people who are doing care work, healing work, and creative work. People who are driven by a passion and not just for money. To me, people doing that creative work are changing the world for the better. We're the empathy muscle of our culture.
Sunlight ranks in the upper tier of entrepreneurship podcasts on the iTunes chart. Go to your favorite podcast outlet and find Sunlight with Hannah Cole, and go to sunlighttax.com for all the other resources Hannah offers, including details on her money boot camp. Has there been any effort on your part to talk about local autonomy? When I talk with Asheville City Council people and staff, it's always that our hands are tied. The state legislature restricts us in terms of what we can do with taxes, what we can't do with taxes, and what we can do with development, what we can't do. You represent the fastest growing, or one of the fastest growing regions in this state, if not the fastest, and more people moving here, more development happening, and there is a need, or at least a desire, for more local autonomy. Where is that argument?
Yes. And I actually have the privilege of being on the House Local Government Committee. And a lot of those issues are coming through us before they go down to the House floor. So just a quick little civics background for people. There's basically two types of states in this country. There are home rule states and there are Dillon's rule states. In home rule states, essentially local governments are allowed to do what they want to do unless the state specifically says that you can't do that. In Dillon's rule states, which we are modified Dillon's rule state, essentially they call it like a mother may I, right? Local governments can't do anything unless the state says specifically that they can do that. And so I think a lot of people, when they ask questions like, why can't Asheville City Council just do this? Or why can't Buncombe County government just do this? It's because of that. It's because of that structure. And so we're seeing a lot of those things come up through the committee. And 98% of the time, I am in favor of local control. This is an extremely diverse state in a lot of ways. And what works for Buncombe County is not the same thing that works for Graham County or Wake County.
What do your colleagues on that committee say who don't share that view of yours?
So to them, local control is very important in very specific circumstances and not important at all in other circumstances. So
selectively, it's issue by issue.
Yep, yeah. And in the same way, so a lot of the things that come up through the local government committee are when they're trying to change, for example, a board of education from nonpartisan elections to partisan elections. That's something that will come through our committee. So we see that a lot, right? We know that's happened with the judicial races. They're trying to make essentially every race in North Carolina a partisan race. And so, yes, there has certainly been, I've seen a wide array of hypocrisy come through that committee for sure.
Just a word on this as well. So this was one of my motivations to run for Senate because of my time on city council and being so frustrated at what we couldn't do. And last session, I introduced a whole raft of bills on all the places where the city of Asheville wanted local control and local authority. And of course, none of those went anywhere. Interestingly, Tim Moffitt, who used to be a representative in the House representing part of Buncombe County, he is now a senator from Henderson County. He introduced a bill that would allow the city of Hendersonville to use their on-street parking revenue for any purpose. Currently, under North Carolina law, cities can only use their on-street parking revenue for on-street parking related expenses. And that's very limiting, as opposed to how you can use the revenue that you get from a parking deck. You can use that for lots of things in the city. It's one of those weird things. Who knows why it's in place, but it's there. So I saw Tim Moffitt introducing this bill, and I co-sponsored it. And then I saw him later in the day, and I said, hey, what do you think about adding Asheville to that bill? And he said, no, I don't want to do that, but let's introduce another bill that's just for Asheville. And so we did. And so this is a little step, and it's passed the Senate. So I've actually had two bills now that have passed the Senate. This is giving the city of Asheville a little more authority in a very small place to use this money the way that they want to. So I do feel like people like Tim Moffitt, and maybe Tim Moffitt is really the only one. He and I do not agree on a lot of things, but we have co-sponsored a couple of things together. And he's actually just nonpartisan. And so he's happy to be helpful to the city of Hendersonville. In fact, he introduced another bill for the city of Hendersonville that is so far reaching that I don't think it'll get done, but certainly if it moves forward, I'm going to try to get Asheville added to it. So I see little cracks here and there, but there's so much more that could be done.
Some people believe there's an anti-Asheville bias in the legislature, that there's a stigma to Asheville of being granola, hippie, woo, whatever you want to say, and that there are legislators who want to be anti-Asheville in the legislation. Or is that true?
So I think it was. So let me answer that a couple different ways. So people absolutely think that Asheville is crunchy granola, woo, whatever. When I showed up, that's certainly what they expected of me. Here I am, this environmental advocate from Asheville. The expectations for me were very low, and so I have exceeded them, and I'm very happy about that. So people still feel the way they feel about Asheville, but I think the people that we have in office now, and we're just cutting a new path for Asheville, I will say. And I feel like I don't expect to see anti-Asheville legislation this year, in part, or even anti-Buncombe County legislation, in part because I'm there and I have relationships with the people who might do that. I don't think they're going to do that. And when I hear about it, I go to them and I say, really, you just need to not do this. This is not helpful. And that is not at all to say anything negative about the people who came before us. Susan Fisher, Terry Van Dyne were amazing representatives of this community. And they were serving in extraordinarily partisan times.
You don't think we're in the same partisan times now?
We are, but I think Susan served in the majority for a long time and then got put in the minority. And when the legislature first flipped, it was an extraordinarily angry time. It was Moral Mondays, and that's when Terry Van Dyne, my predecessor, came in. And there was just so much anger and so much frustration and so much demonstrating and all of that. And it was very difficult, I think, for anybody to build constructive relationships in those times. And we're not in that time. They've been in control. They've done a lot of the stuff that they wanted to do. They're comfortable now. They don't have a point to prove anymore.
Well, let's see where this parking legislation goes as a litmus test to see whether that's true or not.
Right.
Is there constituent work that both of you are doing that is very much behind the scenes that people might be interested to know about, that happen on an individual level, a very granular level?
Every single day. One of the most common things is getting a driver's license through COVID. Is that what you were going to talk about?
That was my example.
Yeah. So getting through COVID and now coming out of COVID, it's been very difficult for young people, teenagers, to get their driver's licenses, to get their eye exams, to get their driver's licenses. Scheduling at DMV is very challenging. That's one set of people. Also have people who are trying to go to work and need a driver's license, and maybe their license is expired and they can't get a job until they get a new license. And it's when you call DMV to make an appointment, it's months out, and it may be in Mars Hill, or that's as soon as you can get. What I have found, and I think this is really unfortunate, is if you call our offices, we can get you an appointment within a week.
Really?
Sometimes within days.
I didn't know that. I didn't know you had any intervention with state offices like that.
So here's what I will say is that we shouldn't. That's my view. It should not be that the few people who think to call us get treated differently than everybody else. And it also is the case. That is true.
Is there anything that you're doing with immigrant services, or is there anything about immigration that you're both involved with at a local level? Or
No, not really.
Okay.
Now, I will say, this just came up last week. Of course, a lot of the issues that we work on are, again, long-term. You start by building the relationships your freshman year. You start by meeting kind of the advocacy groups and things like that. So one thing that we're looking at, Buncombe County schools used to have a newcomer center where students who had just moved to the country, were brand new to the country, would have a transition space where they could start school, but it was in a smaller setting, and they would make sure that they were caught up, had some ESL services in addition to some kind of cultural help as well, and then the student would go to their base school after that. That newcomer center is now gone, and students who are brand new to the country get dumped right into Irwin High American History 1. And so we currently only have 2 newcomer schools in the entire state. And so I've just been meeting with groups about that issue and how is that something that we're able to bring back. In Buncombe County in particular, we have a very high population of Ukrainians, of Russians, Moldovans, in addition to Central Americans and South Americans. And so that's probably the closest thing related to immigration that I've been working on.
Is there anything we haven't talked about before we close that you want listeners to know about the work you're doing actively or defensively, and anything, or that you would want anything actionable for the public beyond voting?
One of the things that I like to say, and I like for people to understand, is that on a day-to-day basis, we are not just butting heads and fighting with our colleagues, our Republican colleagues, all the time. There is, in fact, camaraderie, there is laughter, we laugh with each other, we laugh at each other. And again, some days that's harder than others when we have very challenging votes for us. I don't want to laugh with these people. I just want to yell at them. But at the same time, you got to come back the next day and keep doing it. A lot of people come up to us and just say, "Thank you so much for being down there and fighting the good fight and all that." And it not every day feels like a fight. There are some days that are they're just good, and you just have great conversations with your colleagues, and you feel like you're getting a little done. So I think that's important because the national narrative, and certainly what we see in Congress, is it is all rhetoric, it's all anger, it's all meanness, and it's not that way.
Adversarial. I think that's
Yes.
what people anticipate.
Yeah.
Anything you want to leave with, Lindsey?
Yes, state level government does so much that people don't realize. Dr. Chris Cooper on the Do Better Politics podcast, they asked people if you had a magic wand and you could change something about state politics, what would it be? And Dr. Cooper from WCU had a fantastic answer, which is, I wish that we could divert all of the attention to federal politics down to state politics. So I want people to know that there's a lot happening in that building, good and bad, harmful and neutral and positive, that I think a lot of people don't realize. And would just repeat again, constituent services is a really big part of our job. Please call us if there's something that we can do to help. Even if you're not positive that it's a state level thing, you just know that you need help with something, let us know and we can connect you with the right agency if we're not the right agency.
And it's not just call us if you're having a driver's license issue or an unemployment issue or things like that. You should call us if you're having problems with that. But this year, I have introduced, I think, at least 3 bills that are a direct result of constituent communications to me, problems that people have run into, one with county government, and then one with, again, DHS, and one with NCDOT. And I have drafted bills and gotten Republican co-sponsors, and I think those are 3 of the bills that are going to pass, and they are going to address those problems. And now that's not to say we're going to introduce bills on everything that you don't love about about living in North Carolina, but I think if we see a path to solve a problem, that is doable.
I want to thank State Senator Julie Mayfield and State Representative Lindsey Prather for being my guests on today's and yesterday's episode. Today's episode of The Overlook was presented by Sunlight Tax. Today's conversation happened inside the BB Theater in downtown Asheville, which owners Susan and Giles Collard have been so gracious enough to open to me to record my interviews. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. Don't forget, we're giving away 2 pairs of tickets to the rest of the Magnetic Theater's productions for 2023. To be eligible, just sign up for our weekly newsletter at podavl.com. Also, please vote for The Overlook as Best Podcast and for me as your favorite radio host in Mountain Express's Best of WNC survey. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.